Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at the Eritrean pro-democracy movement, and specifically Brigade Nhamedu and their upcoming conference in Addis Ababa. It seems like a pretty pivotal moment for the movement, and we're going to try to unpack why this particular gathering is so significant. We've got some really interesting sources to work with, including a personal account from someone who will actually be attending the conference, as well as coverage of a recent event they held in the UK.
Yeah, it is a really fascinating time for this movement. They seem to have gained some serious momentum lately. And this conference in Addis Ababa, I mean, it's not just any city, is it? You've got this huge population of Eritrean refugees there, and it's a major diplomatic hub for all of Africa. So, yeah, lots to unpack here.
Definitely. So maybe just for starters, for anyone who needs a little refresher, could you give us a quick overview of who Brigade Nhamedu is and what they're all about?
Sure. So they're a relatively new group, founded in 2022, and it's entirely diaspora-led. Their main goal is pretty straightforward. They want to see democratic change in Eritrea. They've been working hard to raise awareness about the human rights situation there, which has been pretty dire under the current regime. I mean, they've been in power for decades. And they keep a really tight lid on any information coming out of the country. So Brigade Nhamedu has been trying to fill that gap. And, they've also been pushing back against any attempts to silence Eritreans who are living abroad.
Right, and they've chosen Addis Ababa for this conference. Why there? What's the significance of that location?
Well, I think there are a few reasons. On a practical level, it's a place where Eritreans feel safe and connected. There's a strong sense of community there, and they can speak freely without fear of reprisal. But I think there's also a strategic element to the choice. Being in Ethiopia, right on Eritrea's doorstep, gives them a chance to engage with regional players who could have some influence on this situation. And of course, Addis Ababa is also home to the African Union, so it's a real center for diplomacy on the continent.
It sounds like they're aiming for something bigger than just internal change within Eritrea.
Yeah, absolutely. They're thinking regionally. They understand that Eritrea's future has implications for its neighbors as well. And they're trying to build those relationships because a stable and democratic Eritrea, that's good for everyone in the region.
Now, you mentioned a personal account from someone attending the conference. Who is this person, and why is their perspective so valuable for understanding what's going on?
His name is Biangarizger. And his story is really quite remarkable. He's a survivor of human trafficking in Libya. He was a refugee himself, and now he's a Dutch citizen. But he's dedicated the last decade of his life to advocating for Eritrean rights. He's spoken at the Dutch parliament, the Swedish parliament, even the European parliament.
Wow, that's incredible. What kind of insights does his personal story offer about the significance of this conference?
Well, for him, this isn't just about abstract political ideals. He's fighting for a future where no one has to endure what he went through. And he's been very vocal about the need for a peaceful transition. He understands how volatile the region is and the potential for instability if things go wrong.
So his voice adds a really important human dimension to this whole discussion.
Absolutely.
Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the UK Brigade Nhamedu event you mentioned. It seems like they're making some strategic moves beyond just this conference in Addis.
Yeah, definitely. The UK event was held in Coventry late last year, and it drew over 900 members, which just goes to show you how much their support base is growing. They use this gathering to celebrate their achievements, elect new leadership, and most importantly, really refine their approach.
Okay. So what were some of the key takeaways from this seminar? What's changing for Brigade Nhamedu?
Well, one big change was extending the leadership term to 2 years. They figured that would provide more consistency and effectiveness. They're also putting a lot more emphasis on engaging families, youth, and new members. They want to make sure this movement has longevity. But I think the most significant outcome was their continued focus on building that relationship with the Ethiopian government.
Okay, so they're thinking long-term and strengthening their base. Tell me more about this relationship with Ethiopia. Why does it seem so central to their strategy?
Well, from the coverage of the seminar, it was clear that this relationship with Ethiopia is really a cornerstone of their approach. They see Ethiopia as a key regional player, and they believe they can be instrumental in facilitating dialogue, and maybe even applying some diplomatic pressure on the Eritrean government.
This is where things start to get really interesting. The location of the conference, this focus on Ethiopia, the timing of it all. It feels like Brigade Nhamedu is really strategically positioning themselves to make some big moves.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. This emphasis on regional diplomacy, combined with their renewed focus on community building, it suggests they're gearing up for a long and potentially very impactful campaign.
So we've got a pretty clear picture now of who Brigade Nhamedu is, the importance of this upcoming conference, and the crucial role that Ethiopia might play in all of this.
And of course, we can't forget Bianga Resger. His personal experiences really bring another layer of urgency and depth to the whole situation. His insights into the need for a peaceful transition are really critical for understanding the stakes involved here.
Right. And that UK seminar, with its focus on long-term planning and community building, it shows they're not just thinking about the immediate future. They're building a movement that can go the distance.
Exactly. It's not just reactive. They're being very proactive, and they're using every tool at their disposal to try to create lasting change.
You know, it's really interesting how Brigade Nhamedu is approaching this whole thing. They seem to get that real change requires more than just protests and activism.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they've really recognized the power of diplomacy, especially in the African context. This isn't just some movement isolated to the diaspora. They're actively working to build bridges and create alliances on the ground in the region.
And it seems like this conference in Addis is kind of the culmination of that strategy.
Yeah, it has the potential to be a real turning point, a moment where they shift from raising awareness to actively shaping the future of Eritrea.
Okay, so let's say this conference goes well. What would that look like? What kind of concrete outcomes would signal real progress?
Well, a major win would be a clear statement of support from the African Union, condemning the human rights abuses in Eritrea and calling for some kind of democratic reforms. That would put some serious pressure on the current regime and send a message that the international community is watching.
That would be huge. But let's be realistic for a second. What are some of the obstacles they might face?
Well, the current regime isn't exactly known for bowing to international pressure. And then there's the issue of potential spoilers, both within Eritrea and from external actors who might benefit from the status quo. And of course, there's always the risk of internal divisions within the movement itself.
Right, so navigating all those different interests, that's going to be key to their success.
Absolutely. They need to maintain a united front while also engaging with those who might not share their vision for Eritrea's future.
That's a tough balancing act.
Yeah, for sure. They need to be firm in their principles, but also pragmatic in their approach.
And that's probably where their focus on community building comes in.
Exactly. A strong, unified base that gives them the resilience they need to navigate all these complexities and, withstand any potential setbacks.
We haven't really talked about the human rights situation inside Eritrea itself. Can you give us a little more context on that? Why is a peaceful transition so crucial?
Well, the Eritrean government has been accused of some pretty horrific things. Restrictions on free speech, arbitrary detention, forced conscription. A peaceful transition would be essential to prevent further suffering and ensure a more stable future for the country.
And it's not just about Eritrea. That stability is important for the whole region.
Absolutely. A destabilized Eritrea, that could have a ripple effect across neighboring countries, impacting everything from migration patterns to economic development.
It's all connected.
It really is. And that's why I find Brigade Nhamedu's approach so interesting. They're tackling this problem from multiple angles, recognizing that lasting change requires a multifaceted strategy.
It sounds like they're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, they're playing the long game, and they're being strategic about it. They're building a movement that's sustainable, inclusive, and most importantly, effective.
Which brings us back to that UK seminar and their focus on engaging families and youth and new members.
Right. They're not just fighting for today. They're building a movement that can carry on this fight for years to come.
So this conference,
yeah,
while potentially significant, is just one step in a much larger journey.
Exactly. It's a crucial step. But the real test will be what comes after. Can they translate the momentum and the connections they make in Addis into concrete actions and lasting change? That's the question we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential of this conference, but you said it yourself. The real work begins after everyone leaves Addis Abeba. What are some concrete steps Brigade Nhamedu can take to turn all this momentum into tangible progress?
I think a big one to watch is their engagement with the African Union. If they can secure a formal statement from the AU condemning the human rights abuses and calling for some sort of democratic reforms in Eritrea, that would be a major win.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That would send a really powerful message. What about their relationship with Ethiopia, though? How can they actually leverage that to their advantage in this post-conference phase?
Well, Ethiopia could potentially play a role in facilitating dialogue between Brigade Nhamedu and the Eritrean government, maybe act as a mediator in some initial talks. And they could also use their influence, to encourage other African nations to put pressure on Eritrea to improve its human rights record.
Okay, so working within those existing diplomatic channels is key. Are there any other international actors they should be engaging with?
Absolutely. I mean, they need to keep building those alliances with Western governments and human rights organizations. Those partnerships are crucial for amplifying their message on a global stage and securing, financial and logistical support for their initiatives.
It sounds like a multi-pronged approach is really going to be crucial for their success. But let's be honest here. This is a bit of a David versus Goliath situation. How can Brigade Nhamedu, a relatively young movement, realistically hope to challenge a regime that's been in power for decades?
That's a good question, and the challenges are definitely real. But history is full of examples of seemingly powerless groups achieving remarkable change through persistent strategic thinking and refusal to be silenced. The key for Brigade Nhamedu is going to be to maintain that long-term vision and to adapt their strategies as the situation evolves.
So flexibility and adaptability are going to be key. What about the internal dynamics of the movement, though? How can they make sure they stay unified and focused on their goals amidst all the complexities of this struggle?
Well, this is where their emphasis on community building becomes even more critical. They need to create spaces for open dialogue and debate where different perspectives can be heard and addressed constructively. And they also need to be transparent about their decision-making processes and accountable to their members.
So it's not just about managing external pressures, it's about managing those internal dynamics as well.
Yeah.
Sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It is, but it's a balance they seem to be striking pretty effectively so far. I mean, their success in bringing together such a diverse group of people under a shared vision, that's a testament to their leadership and organizational skills.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the upcoming conference to the potential role of Ethiopia, the need for international alliances, and the importance of internal unity. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's one overarching takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the main takeaway here is that while the challenges ahead for Brigade Nhamedu are immense, their strategic approach, their commitment to nonviolence, and their growing base of support, all of that offers a glimmer of hope for a more democratic future for Eritrea.
That's a powerful message of hope to end on. This is definitely a story that deserves our attention and one that we'll be following closely. So to our listeners, keep an eye on the developments surrounding this conference in Addis Abeba. It could be a real turning point in the struggle for a better future for Eritrea. And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to learn more about Brigade Nhamedu and their mission.
It's the story of resilience, determination, and the unwavering pursuit of freedom and human rights. It's a story that reminds us that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, change is always possible.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Brigade Nhamedu and the Eritrean pro-democracy movement. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.